talk a little bit more about what expectations are like around that is a panel of our senior political strategists here at CTV. We've got Kathleen Monk. She's a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Tonight was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and a former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid rounds us out. He's, of course, a CTV News political analyst, as well as former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Very, very nice to see you. Scott, I'll start with you. What is this throne speech about for the government?
Well, I think it's about two things. One, like usual, it's going to be about delineating their priorities, and that comes at a time that's quite unique in our history. We've got a brand new prime minister following what's been quite a stunning set of political events. Prime Minister Trudeau leaves office, we have a snap election, a guy who's never been in elected office elevated to prime minister, so on and so forth. But of course, it all really takes place in the shadow of Donald Trump's threats with respect to our trade relationship and even our sovereignty. And of course, we've been talking about this all morning. You guys have been chatting about it. So to me, the big question is, what will we hear from the King's lips themselves? Because he will be speaking in the possessive. He'll be saying things like, "My government wishes to make it clear." And then how does that sentence end? How dramatic will it be? How sharp will it be? Will it end with, "This country is not for sale"? Canada will never be the 51st state. It's hard to imagine the palace would permit the King to say those things. On the other hand, you have to hew to that message. So I'll be really watching for that. And all of that makes this a very unique moment, and one that I think, you can have lots of royal skeptics, but it adds a level of drama and weight to today that we'll all be watching carefully.
I imagine, just jumping off, Corey, what Scott said, it's a difficult balancing act, right? Like, it doesn't feel like a moment in time where there's a big desire to antagonize the U.S., particularly since the threats around our sovereignty are not being repeated in the way that they were prior to the election. At the same time, like, there's a reason the King is here, and a lot of it has to do with our sovereignty.
I think that's true, and I think it's also important for the monarchy itself. I think the King was not viewed very positively by a lot of royal watchers and supporters in Canada by being so subtle and silent when the rhetoric was much more heated coming from Donald Trump, and then in the midst of that, extending an invitation through the Prime Minister of Great Britain or the UK to the President of the United States, which really made it I think very uncomfortable for a lot of Canadians and a lot of people who support the royal family. So I think there's a little bit of damage control here for the King and the royal family, and I think that pushes them towards maybe being a little bit bolder in what's said. I think there's a confluence of interest for both the Carney government and Canadians generally, but I think also for the royal family to say, yes, while we have historic friendship with the United States and fought side by side in many wars and other things, but we are a sovereign nation, and we have a different set of traditions and institutions. This is not a republic, it's a commonwealth under the British Westminster parliamentary system. There's a proud tradition on which other democracies have followed. But it's our own, and it's unique, and it's Canadian, and we need to speak with some confidence and pride when we talk about those things. And I think if the King falls short of doing that, I think he'll have really missed the moment.
Kathleen, what will you be watching for in the throne speech?
Well, I think it's interesting because Prime Minister Carney seems at every pivotal moment takes the time to actually almost educate Canadians about their history. He did so when he was first sworn in as Prime Minister on March the 14th, highlighting not only our English roots, our French roots, our Indigenous roots, and really trying almost to reassert Canadian sovereignty through our history. So I'm looking for some of that, some of, how Carney's government now kind of tries to explain to Canadians what their political thesis is on what Canada is and what Canada is going to be in the future. I mean, it's hard not to get caught up in all of the political theater and stagecraft. It's really a regal return to Parliament, a Parliament that really hasn't been sitting for over 5 months now since Parliament rose in December after that kind of, dramatic flare of an ending with Chrystia Freeland refusing to actually read the fiscal update, and then the subsequent resignation and prorogation of Parliament. So it's, I'm watching to see, really how this government puts forth its ideas. And it's a difficult time, not only because of the things you've discussed in terms of the threat from the U.S., the tariffs, and the very threat to our sovereignty, but also just the economic headwinds that Canada is facing, right? Not only, are we facing increasing unemployment, but the threats of a possible recession. And I think that's why you've seen the government try to take a beat, take some time before they introduce and table a budget. They need that time to really kind of get a sense of where the economy is going and what this government's going to do to kind of increase productivity and hopefully keep our economy on the right track despite all of the threats that are coming at it.